We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Wadawurrung people, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
It's the HSR podcast brought to you by WorkSafe, helping you achieve better health and safety outcomes in your workplace. So far in this series, we've learned all about the basics of consultation in workplaces and exactly what are health and safety representatives. If you've missed the first two episodes, please make sure you hit the links on the page to catch up, because in this episode, we're meeting two inspectors from WorkSafe's representation support team, Cindy O'Connor and Sujith Sugathan, to discuss establishing designated work groups, also known as DWGs, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act or OH&S Act.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for joining us. Cindy, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about your role at WorkSafe.
Thanks, Chris. My role at WorkSafe is to make inquiries and observations, and it's usually about representation support.
And Sujith?
Yep. So I'm the same. Both of us are inspectors dealing with a particular section of the Act, which is the representation. In simple words, all issues in relation to designated work groups, health and safety representatives, the elections, the disputes, and those sort of things are normally dealt by us.
And Cindy, I believe you used to be a trainer for HSRs prior to joining WorkSafe. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and any tips you can give that you've got out of that?
Absolutely. When people would come to the training, they would be health and safety reps or deputy health and safety reps. And one of the first things we would do on day one is figure out, who are you representing? So figuring out who is in the designated work group. And it can be more complicated than it sounds.
Sujith, what are designated work groups?
So a designated work group, in simple terms, is a cohort of employees, a group of employees grouped together who would be sharing similar sort of work interests to represent their health and safety issues. So it's more like an electorate where you have a pool of people and then that designated work group will elect a health and safety representative to represent them in relation to any health and safety issues they have at the workplace.
So when we're talking about work interests, we're talking about occupational health and safety matters, like ensuring they're accessible to each other and can understand the employee's work and needs?
Yeah.
So Cindy, why would a workplace need to establish a DWG?
I think the most important thing is that if somebody is going to be a health and safety rep, you really need to know who you're helping, because you are a volunteer. You don't have to help anyone. You don't have to help everyone. So when someone comes to you, it's good to know if you're their representative or if somebody else is.
So Sujith, when establishing a DWG, how does that happen in a workplace? Is it something that happens automatically, or is there a process that needs to go through?
Yeah, it definitely goes through a process, what is termed as a negotiation. So it can either happen from an employee or someone from the employee side making that request, or an employer doing that. So once a request is initiated to set up a designated work group, then the employer has got 14 days within which they should commence the negotiation. So basically, they have to start the process within 14 days. That's what the Act says. Once that starts, then they go through various aspects within the Act that talks about how a negotiations should progress. And then they slowly come to whether they can agree on a particular structure or they disagree. So these are the two outcomes that it can have.
And Cindy, who gets to be involved in those negotiations as part of the DWG?
People at the workplace. So if you are a worker in Victoria, you can get together with the other people you work with and you could nominate, or you could actually really encourage somebody else to nominate to be that representative.
Thanks, Cindy. So, Sujith, what about unions? Do they play a role here at all?
They could. And as Cindy said, if the employees choose to nominate a representative on their behalf, that's when they can come in and do the negotiation on behalf of their members. So it's totally up to the members if they want a representative on behalf of them to represent them in the negotiations.
So moving on from the who and why, we know it can get a little bit technical, but what things must be included in negotiations for a DWG?
Right. So there are a few non-negotiables according to the Act. And those are certain things that must be included. And I think the reason why it is provided is to make sure that the scope of those negotiation does not go outside the terms of that act. So, for example, if you look at the negotiations according to Section 44, it talks to the group of employees at one or more workplaces who should be grouped. So when we say one or more workplaces, consider a labor hire who are providing employees to two different workplaces. However, the two group of employees belong to the same employer, so they can have a designated work group for the original or the substantive employer for whom they work for. And then it goes on about it should best enable the OHS, the occupational health and safety interests of these people, these employees, how to best group them, the structure, how they want to do it. And then it talks about the health and safety representative, how many should be there, or the deputy health and safety representative. So it totally depends on various things again within this section that says what must be taken into account when you're looking into the number of health and safety reps or deputies, because it's a very dynamic factor and it could change and it will be different in various workplaces. So you look at various sort of things before you make those determinations. Then also the Act talks into contractors, whether they can be represented as a part of the designated work group, because when we go out to workplaces, we see a lot of places where you have employees and also you have a cohort of contractors coming in and working for the employer there. So it's very important that they should not be treated any different to an employee being treated at the workplace. So I think it's to ensure that they are represented right. These negotiations takes place.
So you just mentioned in there, Sujith, the different sizes and types of workplaces across Victoria. We know that a maximum term an HSR can have is 3 years, but especially for different sizes of workplaces, is there a limit on how many HSRs can be elected in a workplace?
There isn't a number in black and white in the Act. So a recent example is I went and did an inspection in regional Victoria. There are 70 employees. For the last 5 3-year terms, there's been one health and safety rep. As you can imagine, he would like to have a bit more support. So a negotiation took place and they varied it to say for the one work group, there'll now be 3 health and safety reps. So the long-term HSR can pass on the information to the new health and safety reps, and those 2 new health and safety reps will have a really good handover, because spoiler alert, that HSR is probably going to retire in this 3-year term.
And a similar question for designated work groups. Obviously, some workplaces are much larger than others, and some workplaces have different types of workers doing different types of jobs. Is there a limit on the amount of designated work groups, or is there a good number to have?
It's always particular to where we go. So I went to a workplace last week, and one person in the work group said very confidently, there are 5 of us on day shift, 2 on afternoon and 1 on nights. And another person said, but we've also got the 2 coordinators who work office hours, and we have the truck driver who works for XYZ. So there isn't a limit, but it is really important to know that everyone is in the A group, whether there's 1 or 20.
To make sure that they're represented and they have that support when needed. So let's go back to negotiations, Sujith. What happens if you have run a negotiation and you're not able to get an agreement?
Right. So the negotiation happens between these parties, like the employee, their representative, and the employer. So these are the parties involved in a negotiation. So that's the initial stage, which I mentioned before. And if they cannot come to an agreement, that's when either of the parties can call up WorkSafe's advisory and request for an inspector to attend in order to make a determination. So that essentially gets them to a point where an inspector would go in, make inquiries according to these sections of the Act to best understand what the workplace does and how the structure is, taking into consideration whatever is listed under these sections. and then the inspector will make a determination to best represent the health and safety of employees there.
Sujith, just before we get to what happens next, as you've stated, some of these sections of the Act are pretty technical. So let's call in Anita, who's the Manager of Industry and Representation Support at WorkSafe, regarding the specifics of the OH&S Act here.
In negotiating how best to group employees into DWGs, the most fundamental issues that should be considered is how groupings affect the health and safety of employees. An ideal grouping is one that assists in securing the health and safety of employees. Section 46 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act sets out the following matters that must be taken into account in negotiations concerning a DWG, also including negotiations for a variation of an agreement. The number of employees at a workplace, the nature of each type of work performed, the number and groupings of employees who will perform the same or similar types of work, or who work under the same or similar working arrangements, for example, work hours, job grades, licence requirements, or employment contracts or certified agreements, the areas at the workplace where each type of work is performed, the nature of any hazards, the overtime or shift work arrangements, and whether other languages are spoken by employees.
Thanks, Anita. So now that we know that, Cindy, what are some of the tips that you can give us as an inspector to address these cases?
Please have a written copy of what the resolution was. So did you agree on 1 group, 10 groups, all those particular details that Sujith talked about? Because if you need us to make inquiries and observations down the track, the inquiry will be, where is your agreement, the list of what you've agreed on, and we need to observe that document. If you don't have it, don't create it because we asked for it. Say you don't have it, and then we'll work through those steps to get to a record that's fair and reasonable for everyone to have access to.
That's really good advice. Sujith, what other things should employers be considering when talking about health and safety representatives and DWGs?
Yeah, look, there are a few things, and again, as mentioned before, the time frame within which the negotiation should start. So that is something that the employer should be wary about, because that is very prescriptive in the Act. And then it goes on to a section where it prohibits someone from using coercion to either not go ahead with this particular negotiation process or formation of the designated work group. So that is considered as an offence under the Act. And also, as Cindy mentioned, the written agreement is the responsibility of the employer, which again is their responsibility, and it is also an offence under the Act if it's not provided to the employees once it's agreed. So these are the things that the employers should be wary about, and those are the obligations under the Act.
We've spent a lot of time talking about requirements for employers and how DWGs are established. I want to hear a little bit about yourselves as inspectors. Could you give me an example of where, as we were speaking before, you've had to go into a workplace and make a determination?
The most recent one was a request for us to make a determination, but there was a lot of maturity and agreement between everyone. So we were actually able to, with our inquiries and observations, facilitate an outcome that we could write in our report, which actually said, we're asked to make a determination, we made inquiries, and then the parties, being the employer and the workers, reached agreement. So what we did there is we gave them some more time to consult with each other, because they actually weren't as far apart as they thought they were. So we were able to provide some information and some guidance that could have been a determination, Chris, but we could see that we could help people reach their own agreement, which we would say is probably going to last longer
than something that was mandated per se.
If you need us to mandate, we know how to do that, and we will do that for you. But as representation support, we'll first inquire with you about, what have you already been talking about? How close are you? What are the obstacles? So I think myself and the other inspector are pretty proud of that we got to the point where the parties could reach agreement.
A good result.
Also, one more thing just to add to that, as Cindy mentioned, so what we try to explain to the workplaces, like to both the parties, are when an inspector get involved to make a determination, it essentially depowers both the parties there. And the whole point of the representation is to have a healthy functional relationship between the employer and the employee group. So this is a starting point. So we highly recommend that we do not want to see a breakdown at this stage itself. Rather, you should try and talk through the issues and try to reach a resolution by yourself. We are more than happy to come and assist if you want, but always it's highly recommended that you come to an agreement, and that's the best possible outcome for both the parties. And also, one more point we missed out, I think, previously, is that these designated work groups and the agreement is something which is always variable. So any parties to this agreement can later make a request to vary the designated work group, which means it could be due to many reasons. The employee group has scaled up, you got more employees, or the shift pattern of the work has changed, or anything else that the employees think that has affected the original structure, and they can ask for a variation, which means we go back to the same step one. You go into a negotiation process, discuss what has changed and what changes do you need in the designated work group, and then try to come to an agreement. If not, then again, inspector can be requested for a determination.
Great advice, Sujith. Thank you. I will just ask you both just for any final advice you've got for our listeners on how to improve health and safety in the workplace, but how to do that through designated work groups and the importance of them.
Never, ever do it alone. So when we come to attend your workplace, there's 2 of us. When we come to make inquiries, make sure you have someone else with you so that when we send our reports, they remember as well what happened in the discussions. So don't work alone, and don't do anything in representation support alone either.
Sujith?
As said before, look, the designated work group has to be set up properly, which is the only way HSR can be elected and the powers can be enforced. So that is a very important step to the whole process. So setting it up in the right way, setting it up for success is very, very important in this aspect. And if anyone is stuck, be it the employer or the employees, you always can reach out to our team, where we have a dedicated line of support officers who can provide valuable advice on how to progress through each stage. And moving past that, there is always inspectors who can assist with the same thing. So you got a lot of help. I would say that reach out, ask for help, and we will be more than happy to come and assist.
Good to know you guys are there when needed. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
That was Cindy and Sujith from WorkSafe's industry representation team with some great advice on establishing and using designated work groups, or DWGs. Now, as we heard, DWGs are a critical part of health and safety representation in the workplace. A designated work group is an agreed grouping of people, and you will need to establish a DWG if requested by your employees and if you want to have HSRs. The negotiations will need to start within 14 days of the request being made. All employees can be a part of the negotiation process, and the employer or their representative. There are some specific things that must be included in the negotiation process for a DWG. The things that must be taken into account when negotiating for a DWG include the number of employees, the nature and each type of work performed, the areas of the workplaces, and the nature of any hazards, any overtime or shift work, and what languages are spoken. There is no limit on how many HSRs there can be in a workplace. DWG structures can be varied, and if you need help or can't agree on a structure, a WorkSafe inspector can do it for you. For further information on today's topic, you can check out the guidance links in the text below. This has been another episode of the HSR podcast brought to you by WorkSafe, helping to achieve better health and safety outcomes in your workplace. Next time, we'll find out about electing HSRs in your workplace. Until then, if you have any OH&S issues or concerns, or to lodge a case, please contact WorkSafe's advisory service on 1800 136 089. You can also head to the WorkSafe website to subscribe to our monthly newsletter sharing news, events and resources for HSRs. And if you are an HSR in Victoria, the Support Officer team is available whenever you need help. Just email hsro@worksafe.vic.gov.au.
Please note, this information is based on laws applying in Victoria only. It is correct at the time of recording, but is not to be relied upon as legal advice.
This episode does not outline all the legal obligations under Victoria's occupational health and safety laws.